Hey, so I wanted to start this course with a bit of a polarizing subject, kind of have two people in two separate camps on this one, although it is not often mentioned. And it's yes, he did, or no, he didn't. So the question is, did Sigmund Freud rip off Nietzsche? So at the turn of the 20th century, we have Friedrich Nietzsche, this mad prophet of modernity, hammering away at morality, God, and human self-deception. He's interested in ideas of the Übermensch, of master and slave morality. He died in a mental hospital. He saw a man beating a horse, and that seemed to be the catalyst for his mental breakdown. He was in a love triangle. He composed music, piano compositions. They're actually very beautiful. You should look them up if you can. And he had seemed to have a real love-hate relationship with the composer Wagner. And then we have Sigmund Freud, who's the father of psychoanalysis. He was uncovering the dark recesses of the unconscious mind. And many of Freud's most revolutionary ideas were for sure scattered across Nietzsche's writings decades earlier. So the question really is, did Freud borrow? Did he adapt? Or did he just downright rip off Nietzsche? So there is quite a fascinating overlap, and by the end of this, hopefully we can decide for ourselves. So I'm going to set the scene here. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 and he died in 1900. He wasn't a psychologist by training, but his works are bursting with psychological insight. So he really looked into how morality is rooted in resentment, how consciousness is shaped by this sort of deeper unconscious drives. And he was interested in the idea of will to power, this instinctive striving at the core of human nature. So then comes along Sigmund Freud, who was born in 1856 till 1939. He was a neurologist turned explorer of the human soul, so to speak. And he developed this theory of the unconscious, repression, the Oedipus complex, the id, ego and superego, and the sort of conflict between instinct and society. So on paper, Freud denies reading Nietzsche seriously before forming any of his psychoanalytical thoughts and theories. But there are some eerie parallels. So let's start with one of the big ones, which is the unconscious. So Freud's probably his most famous concept is the unconscious, a realm of hidden desires and repressed memories shaping conscious life. But decades before Freud, Nietzsche wrote in the book Beyond Good and Evil, the greater part of our spirit's activity remains unconscious and unfelt. Nietzsche saw consciousness as this, like, the surface, a thin layer floating atop of vast, obscure depths. He even described how moral beliefs and cultural norms arise from this subconscious instinct, what Freud would literally later call repression. So while Freud what would be the word for this? So while Freud definitely adapted on the core premise of it, the insights that humans are largely driven by sort of unconscious forces was already central to Nietzsche's philosophy. So let's delve a little bit deeper on this one. So drives, instincts, and the will to power. Freud's idea of instinctual drives like libido or the death drive also echoes Nietzsche. Nietzsche proposed that beneath our thoughts and values lies this will to power, a primal, often unconscious drive to assert, dominate, and grow. So both thinkers saw humans not as rational creatures, but battlegrounds of conflicting forces. Freud splits this into the id, ego, and superego, whilst Nietzsche didn't formalize it, but he did describe similar internal conflicts, especially between life-affirming and life-denying forces. Morality, guilt, and civilization. Freud's Civilization and its Discontents argues that guilt and repression are the price we pay to live in a society, whilst Nietzsche in On the Genealogy of Morals wrote that guilt was invented by society to control natural instincts, turning strengths inward as a self-punishment, a flagellation on oneself. So both see guilt and conscience as not as a divine gifts, but as products of culture that turn instinctive energy against itself. So the language and structure for sure differ, but the psychological version is strikingly close. So let's get on to Freud's Oedipus complex. And if you're not familiar with the story of Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, um, Oedipus essentially is riddled by a sphinx, and a prophecy is told where he will one day kill his father and sleep with his mother. And that is not the kind of prophecy you want to hear. And he spends his whole life, like any normal person would, trying not to fulfill that prophecy. And in a vain attempt to not do that horrible stuff, he ends up accidentally doing that horrible stuff. So, how does this have anything to do with Freud? Well, Freud seems more original in this one. It's the Oedipus complex. So it claims that boys desire their mothers and see their fathers as rivals. Yet even here, Nietzsche anticipated the theme of hidden family conflict shaping psychology in his probably his best book, in my opinion, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He writes of ancestral shadows and ancestral shadows, the burden of inherited guilt and dark undercurrents within family life. So Nietzsche never framed it as a sexual desire specifically, but he did recognize how family dynamics can sort of deeply mold the psyche, whilst Freud was definitely more into the incest side of things. So why didn't Freud admit it? So did Freud really read Nietzsche? Freud himself admitted Nietzsche was the thinker who knew more of psychoanalysis than anyone else, yet he claimed he avoided reading him deeply. And he actually said he did this because it would he was scared it would bias his work. So that's quite an honest caution he sort of self-awarely said about himself, but others suggest Freud did this to downplay Nietzsche and preserve his image of originality. So let's conclude this one. So was it a rip-off, a reinvention, resonance? So did Freud rip off Nietzsche? Probably not deliberately, in my opinion. More likely, Freud absorbed Nietzsche's idea through the cultural air, through conversations, or even partial reading. And he turned them into a systematic therapeutic method, the talking cure and stuff like that, and even Freudian slips. Freud's genius wasn't just in the insight that humans are driven by hidden forces. He also built a clinical practice to explore and heal them. And Nietzsche was more of a poetic, he was more like poetically diagnostically sort of labeling these things, whilst Freud was the doctor who turned these sort of diagnoses into method. In the end, the sort of real debt may be less theft and more a testament to how powerful these ideas resurface, reform, and transform. There's a lot of truth to them. Hopefully not the Oedipus complex, though. And if you enjoyed this exploration, and stay tuned in the next lecture, I'm going to look at how a Jung brought myth, alchemy, and even spirituality back into the depths that Freud had mapped. And even the greatest minds stand on the shoulders of giants, whether they like to admit it or not. So let's bear that in mind with Sigmund Freud. He certainly was a game changer. And whether he was inspired by Nietzsche or not, there's a saying that good artists create, great artists steal. So it's up to you whether you think Freud stole or not, but I thought it was an interesting comparison, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.